Simulacra in Silk, Haraway's Cyborg, Performative Femininity and the Aesthetics of the Automaton on the Margiela Runway by Dr. Mark Joseph O'Connell. This talk reimagines the representation of female robots through the lens of fashion, exploring how the female-coded machine moves from fantasy object to theoretical agent, anchoring the discussion in the Maison Margiela Artisanal 2024 show by John Galliano, where models emerged as porcelain-faced, sculpturally swathed automatons. It argues that fashion can be a powerful site for reperforming gender and identity. Drawing on Donna Haraway's Cyborg feminism, Judith Butler's gender performativity, and Jean Baudrillard's concept of simulacra, the article and the talk reinterprets iconic robotic figures from Metropolis, Blade Runner, and the Stepford Wives, in comparative dialogue with Galliano's live fashion theater. Rather than depicting women as programmable objects of desire, Galliano's show performs gender as glitched, looped, overcoded, and unraveling. The garments mimic corrugated paper, retro silhouettes, and a braided lace, exposing the costume of femininity as artifice. The Margiela cyborgs walk not to seduce, but to disturb, spectral remnants of a gender system collapsing under the weight of its own signs. Ultimately, this talk proposes that the runway, like the screen, is a hyperreal stage for resisting visual regimes of conformity, and that the cyborg, far from being futuristic, is already here, dressed in porcelain and theatrical distortion and moving, staggering, deliberately off-script. She, emergence from the fog under the Pont Alexandre III bridge in Paris, like a forgotten music box ballerina, limbs clacking softly, eyes glassy and unblinking, her sculpted silhouette swaddled in a braided tulle and warped foam, half doll, half ghost, entirely otherworldly. In a fog-drenched passageway, beneath the flickering pallor of street lamps and the metallic hum of imagined machinery, Maison Margiela's Artisanal 2024 show unfolded like a fevered dream from another century. Automaton effigies, bodies wound tight with invisible gears, movements jerky, slow in an uncanny twilight convergence of gothic automata, film noir shadows, and deconstructed couture. Inspired by the demi-monde captured by Versailles, the mise en scène was also beautifully crafted, a decaying urban underworld echoing with the industrial clinks of forgotten time. Mist pooled along the cobblestone runway, lit from below to elongate shadows and give the illusion of smoke rising from a post-war ruin. A haunting score punctuated by Adele, keening forlornly for a now-lost hometown, echoed through the space, part lullaby, part keening dirge. Heightening the theatrical tension, it was not merely a runway, it was a theater of decay, where bodies performed the roles of haunted machines, caught between memory and malfunction. The garments were similarly sculptural relics of faded grandeur, corrugated, crackling fabrics that mimicked weather-worn parchment or singed paper, braided textiles layered in odd, asymmetrical drapes like salvage from a costume attic of the 19th century. The shredded and distressed gloves and knees of their stockings suggested their wearers had scratched and dug themselves out from their own tombs before appearing at the spectacle. Shoulders jutted like jagged porcelain fragments, waists were constricted by warped corsetry, and skirts ballooned or fell in folds, like antique upholstery unraveling at the seams. These weren't just clothes designed for women. They were clothes about women. Normative femininity and its accompanying expected roles. Models were transformed into mechanical coquettes, their comportment exaggerated, marionette-like, their heads tilted at jarring angles, eyes unblinking, lips frozen in permanent painted pout. Faces were rendered into glossy porcelain masks by Pat McGrath's masterful makeup. A fusion of silent film glamour and antique doll eeriness. Cheeks glowed with artificial flush, eyebrows penciled with vintage precision, lashes thick and unblinking like synthetic feathers. Women as constructs, as objects, as performative figures in a crumbling narrative of beauty. John Galliano has long been a master of weaving historical references into his work. Never as direct reproductions, mind you, recontextualizing the fragments instead. His Margiela Artisanal 2024 collection, staged on Thursday, January 23rd, 2024, continued this trajectory, reanimating the past through a postmodern lens. The garments carried whispers of the Belle Époque, the Roaring Twenties, and pre-war couture, but all in a deconstructed, time-worn state. Corsetry was exaggerated and exposed, draped with an air of ruin. Corrugated paper-like textiles and abraded fabrics played with the idea of couture as both an artifact and a living entity. The deliberate use of distressed materials, the faux moth-eaten tools and fabrics appearing as though they had been rescued from fire or flood, echoed the wabi-sabi philosophy of embracing imperfection. It also aligned with the Margiela ethos of deconstruction, wherein the unfinished and the decayed are considered as beautiful as the pristine. This aesthetic of eroded grandeur was particularly striking in the collection's evening wear. Dresses that might once have been opulent ball gowns appeared reassembled from salvaged scraps, their former glory glimpsed through layered gauze and shredded organza. Galliano's genius lay in the way these references were never literal. Instead, they visually communicated as palimpsests, layers of history seeping through into the present, engaging in a dialogue with temporality itself. Pat McGrath's makeup artistry also played a crucial role in the performative illusion of the collection and of the makeup design, as she states, quote, "The collection explored the idea of Paris by moonlight on the Seine, with exquisite muses coming to life in a beautiful tableau and in a painterly way. The highlight of the look was this modern take on porcelain glass skin, which we achieved by making the model's face as shiny and reflective as glass." End quote. As a designer who worked previously in the creative department of MAC Cosmetics, I was astounded by the artistry of the maquillage. Models were transformed into living porcelain dolls, their faces smooth and built up to a flawless glassy sheen. Their lips were sculpted into diminutive cupid bows, a reference to 1920s silent film stars, while their eyes lined in kohl had an exaggerated glassy effect, enhancing their resemblance to antique figurines. This hyperreal aesthetic lent the collection an unsettling beauty, teetering between animation and inanimation. It aligned with postmodern notions of the simulacrum, where reality is mediated through artificial constructs, and that is from Baudrillard, 1994. The models became avatars of a bygone era, filtered through Galliano's theatrical vision, their artifice simultaneously celebrated and subverted. As they walked, staggered, the effect was transfixing and eerie. Their gait lacked human fluidity. Instead, it mimicked the jerky choreography of early automatons, wound too tight, programmed to repeat the same ghostly gestures. One model extended her arm in a mechanical wave. Another paused mid-stride as if caught in a loop, her gaze vacant yet exact. The performance transformed the runway into a disquieting dreamscape where femininity was dissected and reconstructed, not in flesh but in twine. Textiles that resembled mattress padding at times, and glassine porcelain countenances. There were male automatons as well, but they were not presented in faux naked embellished body stockings. They did not look like Belle Époque courtesans. They closer resembled street urchins or fugitive pimps. The full, grim glamour spectacle was reserved for the women, and as will be explored in this talk, it aligns with a history of female as robotic construct that goes back hundreds of years. Galliano's Maison Margiela Artisanal 2024 collection is best understood not in isolation, but as part of a broader aesthetic and conceptual lineage, both within his own career and the wider tradition of fashion's flirtation with the post-human. While this collection continues Galliano's long-standing practice of referencing history through a deconstructed theatrical lens, it also marks a critical evolution in how femininity is portrayed on the runway. To fully appreciate its implications, it is expedient to cross-reference the collection to Galliano's own oeuvre, the Maison Margiela legacy, as well as parallel Cyborgian collections across fashion history. Galliano's time at Dior, especially in the late 1990s, offers useful precedent. The Dior Fall-Winter 1997 Haute Couture collection, for instance, staged a deliciously opulent vision of a vampy Belle Epoque courtesan, where corsetry, lace, and drama emphasized spectacle over wearability at times. As Caroline Evans notes in Fashion at the Edge from 2003, Galliano's work during this period exemplified the use of Galliano's siren as a ghost that reveals a trace of 19th century modernity, end quote. This approach, situating the female figure as a historicized object of display, resurfaces in the 2024 Margiela show, albeit with far greater existential depth and posthumanist Cyborgian critique. At the same time, Galliano's vision stands in deliberate tension with Maison Margiela's foundational ethos. Martin Margiela's own Fall 1998 collection replaced models with marionettes suspended from rails, a movement to critique the commodification and objectification of the female body in fashion. Evans observes that Galliano's libidinous aesthetic tends toward opulence and hyper-femininity, while Margiela's legacy emphasized anonymity, asexuality, and anti-spectacle. This clash generates productive friction. Galliano's collection can be seen as both homage and rupture, where the doll motif becomes not a metaphor for erasure, but a critical cipher for cyborg theatricality. The show's use of shredded tulle, scorched remnants, and marionette-like posturing suggests not perfection, but exhaustion, femininity caught up in a feedback loop of malfunction. Fashion's engagement with the robotic or cyborg body, however, certainly predates this collection. As Annika Smelik notes, post-human fashion, quote, pushes the boundary between the human and the non-human, blurring the borders between human and machine, humans and animals, and organic and artificial, end quote. As noted in Paradoxical Creatures, Gucci's Fall-Winter 2018 collection, which was designed by Alessandro Michele, the cyborg was referenced explicitly through Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto from 1991. That show, the Gucci show, famously featured models carrying replicas of their own severed heads, alongside dragons, third eyes, and surgical prosthetics. Michele stated that the collection envisioned the body as a hybrid site, a cut-and-paste entity no longer bound by nature. The runway became a clinical operating theater of posthumanist identity exploration, suggesting that the self is both constructed and performable. However, this vision of the cyborg was steeped in irony and surrealism. The Gucci cyborg did not suffer or jam. They were spectacles of multiplicity, mutation, and meta-fashion. In contrast, Alexander McQueen's Spring-Summer 1999 show marked a more visceral moment of human-machine entanglement. During the show's climax, Canadian supermodel Shalom Harlow stood on a rotating platform as two robotic arms spray-painted her pristine white dress with black and radioactive chartreuse paint in front of a live audience. The performance dramatized the vulnerability of the human subject under the gaze and control of technology. Yet even here, the machine was an external aggressor, an aesthetic collaborator and adversary. The outcome was sublime, albeit uncanny, a violent, real-time creation of couture beauty on the catwalk. Terry Mugler's 1995 couture collection offered an example of a literal robot fashion. His iconic metallic bodysuits, especially the molded chrome fembot armor, transformed the female form into a sci-fi exoskeleton. These garments celebrated artificiality, eroticized automation, and engineered seduction. Mugler's Cyborg was sleek, sexy, and symmetrical. They positioned the robotic femme fatale not as critique but as hyper-glamorous embodiment, part dominatrix, part android goddess. An anthropomorphized heavy metal magazine cover come to life. Edith van Herpen, working across the 2010s and 20s, continues to pioneer a biologically inspired posthumanism using 3D printing, computational design, and parametric fabrication. Her garments mimic neural networks, liquid motion, and non-human anatomy, suggesting that fashion can simulate not just bodies, but non-anthropocentric life forms. Her 2018 Syntopia collection, for example, fused kinetic sculptures with garment movement, producing otherworldly silhouettes that redefined bodily limits. Or the Autumn-Winter 2014 Biopiracy collection, which featured suspended models encased in vacuum-sealed plastic as part of the runway presentation. Her cyborg is one of fluid integration, not breakdown, a lab-grown futurity wherein human and machine seamlessly merge. As Smellick argues, designers like Van Herpen materialize, quote, a post-human style of in-betweenness, creating encounters between craftsmanship and technology, and between the organic and inorganic, end quote. This makes Van Herpen a conceptual foil for Galliano, whose 2024 cyborgs embrace not seamless hybridity, but rupturing malfunction. These moments represent fashion's ongoing post-human turn, and Galliano's vision contributes to this genealogy, but redirects the emphasis from sleek futurism toward dusty decay instead. From the slick chrome of Haraway's imagined cybernetic being to a lonely, rain-misted, foam-wrapped figure, staggered by weighty memory. This temporal disjuncture, which positions Galliano's cyborgs as haunted rather than hopeful, aligns with recent theoretical interventions in post-human fashion studies. As Del Bosco notes, cyborg aesthetics have evolved towards a carnivalesque mode of theatricality that embraces fragmentation, irony, and historical dissonance. Galliano's use of distressed materials, theatrical makeup, and jerky marionette movement produces precisely this effect. The models do not suggest optimized enhancement, but malfunction instead. Their artificiality is not idealized, it is ruptured. If McQueen's robot as designer was aggressive and Gucci's was ironic, Galliano's is uncanny, folding in on itself, corroded by time and dressed in the archives of femininity's ghost. In this light, the 2024 Artisanal collection stages a confrontation not only with fashion history, but with the very codes of femininity. Corsets do not shape the female form, but constrain it to parity. Bustles are rendered not in silk, but in sponge. These are garments of power. These are not garments of power or seduction. They are costumes of programmed exhaustion. Galliano's cyborgs are not projections of an empowered future, but haunted remnants of identity performance looped into malfunction. As such, they constitute an essential contribution and counterpoint to fashion's growing archive of post-humanist aesthetics. Figures dressed not for the runway, but for potential societal collapse. This article explores how female robotic representation across film, theory, and now fashion articulates tensions between gender, control, and simulation. From Maria in Metropolis to Priz in Blade Runner and the suburban fembots of Stepford, these figures have functioned as mirrors of cultural anxiety, desirable yet dangerous, programmable yet also so unruly at times. The article also offers a new interdisciplinary framework for understanding robotic femininity in fashion by placing Galliano's Margiela Artisanal 2024 collection in direct dialogue with canonical cinematic robots and posthuman theory. This study contributes a threefold innovation. First, it expands fashion studies by mapping a lineage between filmic artificial women and contemporary couture, demonstrating how Galliano's designs activate long-standing visual and ideological codes of mechanized femininity. Second, it introduces fashion illustration as a critical research method, using drawn analysis to reveal gestural, material, and affective dimensions, not always captured by conventional runway photography. And third, it advances a new concept of the cyborgs of historical decay, arguing that Galliano's figures do not merely reference technological futures, but expose femininity as a glitching, time-worn simulation. Through this combined approach, the article reframes the Margiela 2024 show as a key site for rethinking how posthuman aesthetics, gender performance, and visual culture intersect in contemporary fashion. The conceptual framework through which the female-coded machine figure is analyzed moves progressively from foundational cyborg theory of Haraway to critiques of simulation and representation from Baudrillard, and finally to gender performativity, and that's from Judith Butler from 1990. These perspectives provide a layered apparatus for interpreting robotic femininity in both film and fashion. Firstly, however, a necessary digression into nomenclature. The terminology of cyborg, robot, and doll are often used interchangeably in popular discourse. However, these categories each carry distinct theoretical, cultural, and aesthetic connotations. In the context of this study, where representations of artificial femininity span from early cinema to contemporary fashion, it becomes essential to delineate these figures to better understand their symbolic functions and why. For my explorations, the models in Galliano's Maison Margiela Artisanal 2024 collection are most productively framed as cyborgs, and the cyborg is perhaps the most theoretically saturated of these terms, aligning with Smelik's definition of the posthumanist fashion subject as, quote, a hybrid figure who decenters human subjectivity, end quote. Donna Haraway's foundational A Cyborg Manifesto from 1991 imagines the cyborg not simply as a hybrid of organism and machine, but as a transgressive figure that dismantles essentialist binaries, male-female, human-machine, nature-culture. Haraway's cyborg is a political fiction and an ironic myth, and one that resists purity and totality. As she observed, quote, the main trouble with cyborgs, of course, is that they are the illegitimate offspring of militarism and patriarchal capitalism, not to mention state socialism. But illegitimate offspring are often exceedingly unfaithful to their origins. Their fathers, after all, are inessential, end quote. The cyborg is therefore not an emblem of technological mastery for Haraway, but a strategy of subversion, queering identity and refusal of origin. In this sense, the cyborg exists as a mode of critique. It calls attention to the artificial construction of identity and the ideological systems that sustain it. The robot, by contrast, typically refers to an autonomous machine, constructed and programmed often by human hands to perform specific tasks or mimic human behavior. The term originates from Čapek's 1920 play R.U.R., Rossum's Universal Robots, and is rooted in fears of technological servitude and rebellion. Cinematic portrayals such as by Lang from 1927 present the robot as both seductive and destructive. Maria, the machine mensch of Metropolis, is a fully mechanized replica designed to manipulate and control. Metal-bodied, outwardly sexualized, but ultimately programmable, a product of patriarchal technoscience. Her function is deception and containment, and her destruction is a return to social order. The biotech replicant, as exemplified by Rachel in Blade Runner from 1982, complicates the distinction between robot and human. Rachel is not mechanical in appearance, but genetically engineered, an organic being of flesh and memory implants, Unlike Maria, she passes as human until confronted with the shocking truth of her origin. She exists at the uncanny threshold of simulation and sentience, evoking anxieties about authenticity and empathy. Not simply a machine, she is a fiction of humanity, beautifully dressed up in film noir tailoring and repressed affect. The doll, meanwhile, introduces another register entirely, that of infantilization, objectification, and domesticity. E.T.A. Hoffman's Olympia in The Sandman from 1816 is neither cyborg nor robot. Instead, she is an automaton, a wind-up machine concealed within the figure of a beautiful, docile young woman. Her uncanniness lies not in threat, but in her perfect obedience, her exaggerated femininity, and her emotional absence. She functions as a prototype of the artificial woman as decorative object. The Stepford Wives from 1975 continue this lineage, merging doll aesthetics with domestic ideology. Pastel dresses, vacant smiles, mechanical submission, these constructions are neither cyborg nor robots. They are replacements, cynical, nihilistic simulations created and programmed to eradicate their originals. Galliano's Margiela automatons resonate with all three categories. They move like robots, appear as dolls, and yet it is precisely their contradiction, their fractured hybrid status, that renders them cyborgs in Haraway's formulation. They are not coherent machines nor pure simulations. Their corseted, sculpturally swathed bodies are not slick with futurism, but burdened, scorched, and stained, in fact, with history. Their lovely porcelain faces echo Olympia, but they resolutely refuse her vacuous passivity. Their movements mimic robotic precision, yet they teeter, scrape, and collapse before our eyes. These are bodies overcoated with failure of femininity, of automation, of legibility itself. By framing the Margiela models as cyborgs, I emphasize their function as theatrical agents rather than decorative archetypes. They do not simply replicate the doll, robot, or replicant. Instead, they destabilize each category, revealing the constructedness of all three. My article also employs fashion illustration as a mode of visual analysis, using drawing not simply to depict the garments, but to interpret their aesthetic logic and cyborgian performance. My fashion illustration techniques are used as a form of applied research for this article, synthesizing elements of grisaille rendering as employed by Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, the natural aesthetics of daguerreotypes, and the subtle tinting methods of hand-colored photographs. Particularly through the use of colored chalk. The process begins with a gestural digital sketch, echoing Lautrec's focus on form and psychological expression. This is overlaid with textures mimicking the silvered reflective surfaces of 19th century daguerreotypes, introducing a temporal patina that evokes themes of memory and decay, with a painted postmodern spin thrown in to reflect the robotic automatons presented on the runway. The addition of chalk-based tints delicately applied to textiles and skin recalls early photographic coloring techniques. Infusing the figures with a spectral vitality, equal parts artificial and intimate. As an illustrator trained in fashion rendering, I approach each image as a critical translation, a way of observing texture, gesture, and silhouette that complements textual analysis. Illustration enables a form of slow, embodied looking. By illustrating Galliano's automatons, I restage their movements, distortions, and material surfaces, revealing details that runway photography might flatten or obscure. Sketching the frisson between the abject and the exquisite, so much a part of this collection. This process aligns with visual methodologies that foreground situated, embodied knowledge. The drawing is not neutral documentation, but an interpretive act shaped by the artist's perspective. For me, fashion illustration produces insights that textual analysis alone cannot, revealing through gesture, texture, and visual intuition the subtle material and affective dimensions of a garment that words can only partially capture. The illustrations included in the study thus function in two ways: aesthetic reconstruction of silhouette, materiality, and posture, as well as critical intervention, making visible the artificiality, labor, and coded femininity embedded in the iconography of the collection. In this way, fashion illustration becomes not an embellishment, but a viable research method, a means of thinking through image making, embodiment, and the visual construction of femininity within post-human aesthetics. The literary and art world representation of robots has evolved from mythological constructs to complex agents of philosophical inquiry, reflecting shifting societal attitudes toward technology, identity, and ethics. Early works of fiction, such as Karl Čapek's Rossum's Universal Robots from 1920, which introduced the term robot, portrayed artificial beings as industrial laborers who ultimately rebel against their human creators, a theme that aligns with the Frankenstein complex wherein creations turn against their makers. Isaac Asimov's I, Robot from 1950 advanced robot literature by introducing the 3 laws of robotics, embedding ethical constraints within artificial intelligence and sparking debates around machine logic, autonomy, and moral responsibility. As robot narratives matured, questions of identity and humanity became central. The literary inspiration for Blade Runner, Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep from 1968, blurred the line between human and machine, challenging the reader to reconsider what constitutes consciousness and empathy. In more recent fiction, such as Kazuo Ishiguro's Clara and the Sun from 2021, robots serve as emotionally intelligent companions, exploring themes of love, mortality, and social exclusion in post-human contexts. Collectively, these narratives trace a progression from mechanical servitude to sentient subjectivity, mirroring real-world anxieties about automation, obsolescence, and the ethical treatment of artificial beings. In visual art, particularly surrealism, the doll and the automaton emerged as uncanny emblems of fractured identity and subconscious desire, their rigid bodies and vacant faces becoming vehicles through which artists exposed the dreamlike instability of the human form and the blurred boundary between the animate and the artificial. Also, a deeply at times latent misogyny, as in Hans Bellmer's disturbing visions of disjointed femininity with their fragmented, contorted adolescent doll bodies, which laid bare the awful, reductive, violent mechanics of fetishized desire and control. By placing Galliano's Margiela automatons in dialogue with these representations and aligning them with the post-gender politics of Haraway's Cyborg, this article reframes fashion as a critical arena for interrogating robot femininity, not as a static trope, but as a site of performance, disruption, and theoretical embodiment. I also examine how robotic fashion from screen to runway performs femininity not as essence, but as illusion, aesthetic, and code through the intersecting lenses of Haraway's cyborg feminism, Butler's gender performativity, and Baudrillard's hyperreality. Galliano's 2024 collection doesn't simply reference this lineage, it becomes its most vivid iteration, a haunting and intelligent mise-en-scène where fashion, gender, and machine become indistinguishable. In the foundational A Cyborg Manifesto published in Simians, Cyborgs, and Women, The Reinvention of Nature from 1991, Donna Haraway rejects the binaries that have long dominated Western thought, human-machine, organic-artificial, male-female, and imagines the cyborg as a hyper-transgressive figure who collapses boundaries and challenges essentialist identities. Haraway's theory is a primary theoretical framework for the research in this article, as she proposes the cyborg as a post-gender, hybridized figure that resists dualism such as nature, culture, and human machine. As Haraway states, quote, "The cyborg would not recognize the Garden of Eden. It is not made of mud, and it cannot dream of returning to dust. Perhaps that is why I want to see if cyborgs can subvert the apocalypse of returning to nuclear dust in the manic compulsion to name the enemy." End quote. Her cyborg is a political fiction and material metaphor. As such, it is illegitimate, impure, and strategic, and therefore capable of disrupting essential notions of origin and identity. In the manifesto, Haraway imagines the cyborg as a boundary-defying entity, part human, part machine, part myth, capable of subverting the binary logics that structured Western identity. As she writes, quote, "The cyborg is a creature in a post-gender world. It has no truck with bisexuality, pre-Oedipal symbiosis, unalienated labor, or other seductions to organic wholeness, through a final appropriation of all the powers of the parts into a higher unity." End quote. In other words, the cyborg resists essentialist notions of femininity and masculinity, offering a hybridized alternative that is neither natural nor entirely constructed. It is both and neither. Galliano's Margiela automatons embody this resistance. They are not representations of women per se. They are haunted machines designed to expose the artificiality of the category itself. Cyborg figures dressed in the theatrical ruins of gender, corsets that constrain but fail to feminize, faces so perfectly painted they veer into effigy. Movements that mimic submission, yet also feel encrypted with irony and refusal. The garments wrap and distort the body, echoing Haraway's vision of a subject formed through fragmentation, disjunction, and reassembly. Extending Haraway's logic, Catherine Hale's And How We Became Posthuman from 1999 interrogates the disintegration of boundaries between human consciousness and informational pattern. For Hales, the posthuman subject is no longer anchored solely in the body, but exists as a dispersed network system of code and cognition. The posthuman is not anti-human, but redefines the human in light of cybernetic and virtual technologies. In contrast, Jean Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation from 1994, which was also a primary theoretical grounding for this article, positions robots or androids as hyperreal entities, signs that have lost all connection to reality yet appear more real than real itself. For Baudrillard, humanoid machines don't represent humanity, they simulate a perfected image of it, often reinforcing or distorting social ideologies, like normative gender norms or consumerist fantasies. Baudrillard's concept of simulacra and hyperreality extends the analysis into the realm of visual culture. For Baudrillard, we inhabit a world of signs that refer not only to real objects, but no object. They also refer to other signs, copies without originals. As he states, quote, "Abstraction today is no longer that of the map, the double, or the mirror, or the concept. Simulation is no longer about a territory, a referential being, or a substance. It is the generation by models of a real without origin or reality, a hyperreal." End quote. In this world, reality dissolves into simulation. The hyperreal is more real than real. It supplants the real with an endless play of images. The fashion robot is the perfect hyperreal subject. She is not a woman made mechanical. She is a simulation of femininity without origin. Margiela's dolls do not point to a real woman that they imitate. Instead, they recycle a fashion archive of femininity. 1890s courtesans, 1920s flappers, 1950s housewives, styles stacked upon styles, echoes with no stable referent. In this Baudrillardian frame, fashion's fantasies or idealized beauty tropes endlessly repeat until the original becomes irrelevant. Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity, as introduced in Gender Trouble from 1990, was also indispensable for this research when considering robots that do femininity through the stylized display and representation. Butler's insights reveal how robotic performance of gender, particularly in film and fashion, renders visible the theatrical labor of identity construction while simultaneously exposing its artifice. For Butler, gender is not a stable identity, but a series of repeated acts, stylized performances that align with cultural scripts. As she states, quote, "There is no gender identity behind the expressions of gender. That identity is performatively constituted by the very expressions that are said to be its results," end quote. Gender then can be read as a process, one that is costumed, choreographed, and contingent. In the Margiela 2024 show, we witnessed the literalization of this thesis. The models move like programmed dolls, articulating femininity as a mechanical routine. The exaggerated hip swivel, the modest glance, the submissive arm drape, these gestures are not expressive of an interior gendered self. They create gender through their actions. Galliano's fashion functions as the interface of this performativity, clothing as both script and stage, directing the audience's reading of the figure. The Margiela construction, like Butler's gendered subject, is always becoming through a sequence of stylized actions. In visual culture and fashion studies, scholars such as Judith Halberstam and Ira Livingston in Posthuman Bodies from 1995 examine how cyborg imagery destabilizes normative assumptions about race, gender, and physicality. The body becomes a contested terrain, no longer defined by flesh alone, but by prosthetics, code, and design. Within this context, speculative aesthetics and runway performance, such as Galliano's Artisanal collection, serve as critical spaces where posthuman femininities are both performed and dismantled. The evolution of robotics and artificial intelligence is also inextricably linked to questions of embodiment, identity, and what it means to be human. Scholarly inquiry into these issues spans feminist theory, posthumanist philosophy, media studies, and human-computer interaction, using the figure of the robot or cyborg not only as a piece of technology, but also as a fulcrum for reconceiving subjectivity and agency. As Anne Balsamo notes in Technologies of the Gendered Body, Reading Cyborg Women from 1996, the fascination with the automaton is persistent. Quote, "From Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, published in 1818, to Maria the Robot in Metropolis, to Frankenhooker, a film released on video in 1989, the possibilities of human hybrids have fired our cultural imagination as the Western world has developed through the Industrial Revolution into the age of high technology." End quote. The intersection of gender and robotics, as explored by Balsamo, argues that bodies and machines co-construct gendered meaning, observing that, quote, "although technologies and scientific knowledge are shaped by and indeed embody political and ultimately patriarchal interests," end quote, "they are not monolithic structures that impose a singular reality or set of circumstances on all women equally." As such, attention should be paid to, quote, "both the social and economic forces that inextricably link certain technologies to particular institutionalized patterns of power and authority," end quote, noting that representations of female robots often reinforce patriarchal fantasies of control, but can also offer subversive counter-narratives. Similarly, Elaine Graham, in Representations of the Posthuman from 2002, critiques how artificial bodies exacerbate anxieties surrounding, quote, "the fixity of the categories by which we are used to ordering and understanding the world," end quote, as well as the moral status of the human. From a socio-technical lens, Lucy Sushman, in Human-Machine Reconfigurations, Plans and Situated Actions from 2007, argues that the design and use of robotics is never neutral. She explores how cultural expectations shape both the behaviors programmed into machines and the ways humans interact with them. Her concept of situated action emphasizes that human-robot engagement is always relational, contextual, and co-constructed. Research on the emotional and ethical dimensions of robotic presence include Sherry Turkle's Alone Together, which reflects on how robotic caregivers and companions both promise intimacy and threaten the erosion of authentic human relationships. Turkel warns that we are in a, quote, series of experiments, robots for children and the elderly, technologies that denigrate and deny privacy, seductive simulations that propose themselves as places to live, end quote. And that simulated empathy, no matter how convincing, risks numbing us to the complexities of real affective bonds. Rosi Braidotti, in the Posthuman from 2013, offers a critical posthumanist framework grounded in feminist materialism. She argues that the humanist ideal of the autonomous white male subject must give way to a more ethical and sustainable vision of life that embraces relationality, Zoe-centered ethics, and affirmative technicity. Braidotti even goes so far as to state that due to our deep integration with machines and information technology, modern humans are biomediated bodies. Braidotti identifies humanity's deep imbrications with our contemporaneous technologies, as she states, quote, "The main thrust of microelectronic seduction is actually neural, in that it foregrounds the fusion of human consciousness with the general electronic network. Contemporary information and communication technologies exteriorize and duplicate electronically the human nervous system," end quote. Therefore, quote, "cyborgs are the dominant social and cultural formations that are active throughout the social fabric, with many economic and political implications," end quote. Braidotti examines this process of becoming machine not as dystopic, but as a productive challenge to anthropocentrism, as it, quote, focuses with greater accuracy on the complexities of contemporary technologically mediated bodies and on the social practices of human embodiment, end quote, and as a result, quote, produces a more adequate cartography of our real-life conditions, end quote. For Braidotti, the notion of the cyborg is beyond metaphorization. It is already here, and it is us. Within these theoretical frameworks in place, I now examine three key cultural texts: Metropolis from 1927, Blade Runner from 1982, and The Stepford Wives from 1975, in which the feminine-coded robot emerges as a contested figure of power, spectacle, and control. The three films form a coherent case study trio because together they trace a historical and conceptual progression of the artificial woman, spanning the machinic automaton, the bioengineered replicant, and the domesticized robotic ideal. Cinema provides a crucial comparative lens through which to understand the coded performances of artificial femininity, echoed in Galliano's 2024 collection. Taken collectively, these texts establish a lineage of gendered technological bodies that illuminates the visual and ideological terrain Galliano's couture figures inhabit. Each film offers a distinct aesthetic grammar: metallic rigidity, film noir-inflected biocorporeality, and pastel-hued domestic duplicity, respectively, that resonates with different elements of the Margiela silhouettes, gestures, and material distortions. Metropolis introduces the first iconic cinematic robot woman. Through Maria's transformation into a mechanical seductress, the film enacts anxieties around feminine spectacle, control, and rebellion. Anxieties later examined on Galliano's Runway. In Metropolis, Fritz Lang's iconic dystopic 1927 film, The Maschinenmensch, German for machine human, can be found one of the earliest and most influential representations of artificial life in cinema. Designed to be an exact replica of the virtuous labor leader Maria, the robot is co-opted by patriarchal power and deployed as a decoy, a figure of chaos and seductive manipulation. The robot Maria, in contrast to the real Maria's peaceful, beatific demeanor, is overtly sexualized, provocative, and uses her influence to manipulate and disrupt the social order. The real Maria eventually escapes and attempts to expose the robot's deception. In the climax of the film, The robot Maria is revealed as a false idol to the workers, leading to its destruction. The workers, in their fury, burn the robot Maria at the stake, not realizing at first that she is a machine. Maria's dual portrayal as both a symbol of virtue and a sexualized tool of manipulation highlights the film's exploration of themes related to technology, identity, and control. The public immolation of her doppelganger also brings up many uncomfortable associations of witch burning and even Joan of Arc, and at the root of it all, misogyny. The appearance of the sleek metallic robot body marks the moment when femininity is transformed from idealized virtue into threatening spectacle. Maria's robotic form is hard, cold, and deliberately mechanistic, embodying the brutal efficiency of technology. Her design, characterized by a smooth, featureless face and rigid movements, is a visual representation of industrialization and dehumanization. The transformation of Maria into a robot mirrors the alchemical process of transmutation, where a base subject is transferred into a higher, more refined form. In The Vamp and the Machine, Technology and Sexuality in Fritz Lang's Metropolis, Andreas Hausen explores the relationship between technology and representation in Metropolis. Hausen discusses how the film's portrayal of technology as both a force for progress and a source of danger mirrored societal anxieties of the time. The analysis extends to the film's stylistic choices, such as its expressionistic influences and the use of religious and alchemical symbolism, the latter seen in the creation of the Maschinenmensch. Heusen argues that while the film has been criticized for its ideological simplicity, it holds a deeper, more complex narrative that intertwines technology with gender and sexuality, highlighting how the Maschinenmensch is emblematic of male fears surrounding female sexuality and technological progress. The doubling of Maria, one as a pure virginal figure, and the other as a villainous, destructive vamp, serve to illustrate the tension between these elements. Galliano's Margiela show challenges this legacy, but with subversive intelligence. Like Lang's Maschinenmensch, Galliano's models are costumed as uncanny simulacra, not women per se, but machines performing femininity. Yet the difference lies in agency and tone. Where robot Maria's seduction leads to destruction, the Margiela automatons carry no overt threat. They are hollowed out images moving through fog and disarray, as if running on low battery. Their comportment is erotic and ghostly. The garments cling in odd asymmetrical layers, torn tools, faux burnt velvets, evoking the feeling of a costume attic after a fire. Rather than projecting hypersexualized femininity, they haunt it. Pat McGrath's doll-like makeup seals their identity as post-human relics, perfect in artifice but emptied of affect. The comparison to Metropolis thus becomes a dialogue across time. Both stage the female automaton as theatrical performance, but where Maria is a patriarchal projection, Margiela's cyborgs are post-gender apparitions. They do not seduce or incite revolt. They spew out a corrupted fashion history instead, dragging its remnants across the runway like vintage code that no longer functions. In Ridley Scott's Blade Runner from 1982, the replicants are biomechanical humanoids, replicants, who have been engineered to serve and exist as living contradictions. They are both objects of labor and desire, indistinguishable from the humans, and yet are violently excluded from the category of personhood. In this case, the costume becomes the code, styling as simulation of emotion, identity, and labor. The replicant Priz, categorized as a, quote, basic pleasure model, end quote, and Rachel, the sophisticated corporate conduit who does not even know that she is a replicant, stand out as archetypes of the gendered machinations. Through fashion and gesture, both women perform femininity, albeit in highly distinct and telling ways. The film is set in a dark, rainy, futuristic Los Angeles where genetically engineered beings known as replicants are created to serve humans in off-world colonies. These replicants, while physically identical to humans, are regarded as mere tools and are forbidden to return to Earth. The plot centers around Rick Deckard, a Blade Runner who is tasked with hunting down and retiring, effectively killing, a group of rogue replicants who have escaped and returned to Earth. The replicants are in a desperate race against time to extend their sentience, which is pre-programmed to terminate. Priz's appearance is sexually alluring, yet simultaneously strikingly androgynous, blending vulnerability with a punk-inspired toughness that complicates her role as a manufactured machine of pleasure. Her fashion choices, mesh and leather and heavy dramatic eye makeup, contribute to her portrayal as a complex character who defies simple categorization. Her fashion thus embodies a vulnerable yet defiant duality that reflects both her resistance to societal norms and the precarious tension of living as a desired but dangerous fugitive replicant. In contrast, Rachel's fashion is precise, classic, and elegant, inspired by a femme fatale film noir aesthetic. Her tailored suits, precise makeup, and 1940s inflected victory roll coiffed hair create an image of sophistication and control, masking her true nature as a replicant. Her attire, complete with padded shoulders and a high collar, conveys an image both aloof and chic, positioning her as a figure of elegance and authority within the corporate world of the Tyrell Corporation. Rachel's polished vintage style highlights the tension between her human facade and artificial identity. When she finally literally lets down her hair and confronts what she really is, the film exposes how both her appearance and her sense of self are constructed, raising deeper questions about humanity and the ethics of creating artificial life. The contrasting fashions of Priz and Rachel in Blade Runner serve as visual metaphors for the complex themes of identity, femininity, and the artificial nature of the replicants' roles within the film's dystopian world. Rachel's sophisticated, controlled appearance suggests a simulacrum of idealized female agency, carefully constructed to blend into a society that values conformity and perfection. Priz's disheveled and edgy look, on the other hand, reflects a rejection of these imposed identities, symbolizing the potential for resistance and the breakdown of the boundary between human and machine. The replicants implicitly ask the question whether humanity is defined by biology or by something deeper: experience, memories, and emotion. Baudrillard's ideas clarify how the replicant's fashion in Blade Runner acts as a hyperreal design system, with Priz and Rachel's human-like appearances blurring authenticity and rendering them simulacra, manufactured copies indistinguishable from the real. While the film's decaying cityscape reinforces a world where appearances create reality, and their styled bodies become images without originals. Their memories, their feelings, even their desires are programmed. Ruined Los Angeles, neon-lit, endlessly raining, disintegrating under the weight of its signs, becomes the perfect hyperreal stage for their fashion-coded simulations. Priz and Rachel illustrate the ways artificial women have been engineered to fulfill opposing fantasies. The anarchic rebel versus the insouciant, sophisticate ice queen. Both are confined within gender codes that were programmed by men. Galliano's Margiela automatons are the natural descendants of Priz and Rachel, but their performance is more self-aware, albeit far more broken. Where the Blade Runner replicants dress to pass as human, the Margiela dolls dress to expose the constructed nature of that endeavor. Their garments don't accentuate movement, they impede it. Priz is animalistic and agile, alarmingly so at times, as she menacingly flips and cartwheels around Decker, the bounty hunter, contracted to terminate her. In contrast, Margiela's models are deliberately slow, choreographed in mechanical sequences, as if wound by a key that one inserts in their backs. Where Rachel's classical film noir quoted beauty is meant to fool the viewer, Margiela's is created to confront it. Galliano's automatons are not pretending to be human, they are cyborgs performing the ghost of femininity, long after the system has crashed and planned obsolescence is endangering their startup discs. Galliano's mechanized femme fatales complete what Blade Runner only suggests, that to be a gendered machine is to be caught in a system of visual programming, unless, of course, you can degenerate it from within. His automaton dolls are not tragic figures who wish to be real. They are post-gender parodies exposing the labor of femininity as scripted, stiff, and spectrally surreal. Like Haraway's Cyborg, they inhabit contradiction without apology. They are ancient and futuristic, sexual and sexless, beautiful and busted. Margiela's show doesn't attempt to humanize its robots. It shows them caught in the loop of failed femininity, one fashioned from paper, lace, and foam. These are not women asking to be accepted as real. They are cyborgs warning that their realness was always a simulation. Their couture is not a costume. It is code. In The Stepford Wives from 1975, suburban Connecticut, of all places, becomes the stage for a chilling transformation. Intelligent, independent, articulate women are systematically replaced by docile, hyper-feminine robots. Their voices soften, their intellectual pursuits vanish. Their fashion consists of pastel cinched waists and puffed sleeves. The perfect wife emerges not as an autonomous ideal, but as an erased identity, reprogrammed to serve, and thus literalizes men's assumed desire for submissive, sexy wives who do what they are told without question or complaint. Johnson's and Sears noted in 2011. This is compounded by the fact that the Stepford Wives, quote, themselves do not critique the fetishization of housework, the artificiality of female beauty mandates, or the enforced banality that results, end quote. To the contrary, they, quote, articulate their happiness as anchored in the domestic sphere and in their subservient roles to their husbands, end quote. They are an imaginary mythological referent and a direct product of technoscience constructed by the Stepford husbands. This simulation of domesticized contentment is achieved through murder and replication, as the Stepford husbands kill and replace their wives with man-made robotic doubles. The meta-narratives of this are horrifyingly problematic, to say the least. The article, The Stepford Wives and the Technoscientific Imaginary by Jessica Johnson and Cornelia Sears, offers a comprehensive analysis of the 1975 film through the lens of technoscience and feminist theory. The authors note that while gender struggles and body invasions are important perspectives for any reading of The Stepford Wives, these analyses, quote, frequently admit the centrality of the technoscientific imaginary in enabling the film's specific structures of domination, end quote. The authors explored how the film illustrated the intersection of science, technology, and society, emphasizing how systems of masculine supremacy and other forms of exploitation are embedded within technoscientific practices. The authors argue that The Stepford Wives literalizes male fantasies of submissive, ever-pleasing wives by having husbands replace their partners with robotic doubles, showing how technoscience can enforce gendered power structures. The film thus becomes a warning about how technological progress, when shaped by existing social values, can reinforce inequality and produce dystopian outcomes. The article further examines the film through feminist analysis, focusing on the impact of second-wave feminism and the role of technoscience in shaping gender relations. It situates the film within the broader socio-political context of the 1970s, a time of significant technological advancements and suburban expansion in the United States. The fictional Stepford Men's Association, central to the film's plot, symbolizes the confluence of elite networks of science, technology, and patriarchy, creating a world devoid of women's significance. Moreover, Johnson and Sears highlight the contrast between the men's perception of Stepford as a utopian suburb and the women's experience of it as a dystopian, technoscientific nightmare space. It is in The Stepford Wives where the theories of Baudrillard can be most clearly identified. The women of Stepford are transformed into idealized robotic versions of themselves, created by their husbands to embody the ultimate in traditional femininity, submissive, beautiful, and wholly domestic. The wives are simulacra in the Baudrillardian sense. They are not merely imitations of the real women they once were, but instead entirely new entities that replace the original human beings, rendering them obsolete. The referent was seen as wanting due to their desire for autonomy and equality, and was replaced. As Baudrillard notes in Simulacra and Simulation from 1981, quote, "Simulation is no longer that of a territory, a referential being, or a substance. It is the generation of models of a real without origin or reality, a hyperreal," end quote. In this context, the wives do not just mimic the roles and behaviors expected of them, they are constructed to be perfect hyperreal embodiments of these roles. Baudrillard in a made-up quote that he falsely, hilariously attributed to Ecclesiastes, states, quote, that the simulacrum is never what hides the truth. It is truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true, end quote. In Stepford, the robotic wives embody a hyperreality in which artificial, idealized domesticity becomes the new norm, turning feminist progress on its head by imagining a dystopia where the hard-won gains of women's liberation are erased and they are forced back into exaggeratedly subservient, ornamental roles. Yet it is the inability of even the fembots to successfully perform their domestic duties perfectly that underscores the impossible expectations placed on women and the superficial solutions offered by consumerism. While participating in a consciousness-raising session, Fembot Kit, who represents the ideal servile robotic housewife, reveals despite being a product of advanced technoscience, she, quote, cannot both bake bread and make her floor shine, end quote, and acknowledges that the demands of domestic perfection are unattainable. The horror of the story lies not just in the wife's nihilistic transformation, but in the fact that this transformation is carried out with such apparent ease and societal approval, and by their own husbands, all reflecting the deep-seated cultural fear of the feminist movement and its potential to disrupt traditional power dynamics. The Stepford husbands would rather murder their original wives and replace them with robots than let them live autonomously. Through this lens, the Stepford wives become a chilling representation of the extreme lengths to which patriarchal society might go to maintain control and resist change. The visual coding of the wives of Stepford is crucial. They appear not simply as feminine, but feminized, exaggerated to the point of parody. Their flowing dresses, pinned hairdos, manicured hands, and ever-smiling lips signify a femininity that is both compulsory and simulated. Within Judith Butler's framework, these women are enacting forced gender performance, not for self-expression, but as the ultimate performance for others. There is no slippage, no fluidity, no resistance. Gender here is rigidly policed, programmed into being. The fashionable portrayal of the Stepford wives in the 1970s was not merely a superficial aesthetic choice, but a deliberately reactionary response to the growing women's liberation movement. Dressed in hyper-feminine, idealized 1970s versions of 1950s housewife fashion, the Stepford wives embody a reactionary, nostalgic vision of domestic femininity that reflects the anxieties of a society grappling with the rapid social changes brought about by second-wave feminism. Their attire, white gloves, soft-hued dresses, pearls, and perfectly coiffed hair, evokes the mid-century ideal of a perfect housewife, a figure who devoted herself entirely to homemaking and family, and who existed in stark contrast to the career-focused, independent women who were increasingly making their mark during the 1970s. The film frames Stepford as a site of counter-feminist backlash, implying that women's pursuit of freedom threatens traditional gender roles and prompted a reactionary push back to 1950s ideals, where women's polished appearances serve as tools of control that erase individuality and enforce docile domesticity. In Haraway's terms, the Stepford wife is the cautionary tale of techno-patriarchy writ large, a machine woman stripped of agency, engineered to serve. But the cyborg, as Haraway writes, is, quote, the illegitimate offspring of militarism and patriarchal capitalism, end quote, and she refuses to behave. The Margiela doll is Haraway's cyborg made couture, wired for resistance, not nurturance. These runway cyborgs do not conform to their programming. They drift off script, staring through us, their painted eyes vacant yet accusatory. If the Stepford wife represents the domesticated machine, the Margiela automaton is her escaped feral descendant, still wearing the ruins of the role, but now animated by defiance. In the manifesto, Haraway proposes the cyborg as a mythic and material figure that transcends conventional binaries, such as human-machine, nature-culture, and most radically, male-female. For Haraway, the cyborg is a hybrid born of technology and rebellion, a figure that does not seek a return to origin, unity, or naturalism, but rather thrives in contradiction and fragmentation. It is the illegitimate offspring of militarism and capitalism, after all, but one that refuses to be loyal to its creators. With an eerie prescience, Haraway notes, quote, "By the late 20th century, our time, a mythic time, we are all chimeras, theorized and fabricated hybrids of machine and organism. In short, we are cyborgs. The cyborg is our ontology. It gives us our politics. The cyborg is a condensed image of both imagination and material reality, the two joined centers structuring any possibility of historical transformation." End quote. Predicting the techno-organic fusion that is materializing into the quotidian now of contemporary lived fashion experiences. Importantly, however, for Haraway, the cyborg resists the essentialism often embedded in gender discourses, offering instead a politics based on binaries and affinity rather than identity. In place of shared biology or fixed gender categories, Haraway envisions coalitions forged through situational, strategic alliances. Haraway also insists on the use of irony as a political strategy. The cyborg is not a utopian dream of a perfect synthesis, but a deeply ambivalent and often unsettling being. It is neither wholly liberatory nor wholly dystopian, but a, quote, condensed image of both imagination and material reality, end quote. As such, the cyborg destabilizes not only patriarchal structures, but also the assumptions of organic wholeness upon which liberal humanist identity has long relied. Galliano's Margiela Artisanal 2024 collection enacts this ambivalence with theatrical clarity. What Galliano stages is a spectacular and ritualized unmaking of the Stepford ideal. Variations on a theme, but spooling from a fundamentally corrupted algorithm. The performance of gender is broken, encrypted, excessive, unreadable. In this way, they mirror Haraway's cyborg. Illegible, fragmented, anti-essential, and defiantly impure. Through Haraway's lens, the Margiela automatons can be read almost as cyborgs in drag, exposing the theatrical labor behind fashionable femininity itself. They offer no return to nature, no promise of bodily freedom. Instead, they perform fashion as a series of failed scripts, looping through sartorial history like corrupted memory files. Their disruption lies not in rebellion through force, but through form. Galliano's models may bear the doll-like masks, vintage silhouettes, and marionette machinations of Stepford's engineered wives, but they are hardly obedient. They are ghosts of the algorithm, glitching mid-script, caught in loops of unfinished gestures. Unlike the Stepford wives, who exist solely to soothe male anxiety, Margiela's cyborgs disturb instead. Their costumes look like the ashes of domestic femininity, akin to Barbie dolls rescued from fire, who may indeed still be in the process of semi-immolation. Their mechanical walks exaggerate not grace, but breakdown. They are not here to please. They are here to reveal the labor of pleasing, something alien, strained, and programmed, where the Stepford wife dresses to disappear as they float around the supermarket in floor-length gowns and pristine white gloves. The Margiela doll is dressed to distort. In so doing, Galliano deftly inverts the Stepford logic of beauty as compliant subservience. In conclusion, Galliano's career trajectory has always unfolded as a spectacle, dizzying, theatrical, perilous, and at times redemptive, rising and collapsing in dramatic arcs that mirror the very performance he staged in this Parisian défilé. In the fog-enshrouded environs of Maison Margiela's 2024 show, Haraway's cyborg came to life, not as metallic fantasy a la Metropolis, but as ragged Belle Epoque spectre, limping elegantly through the ruins of high fashion. In Galliano's mise en scène, the automaton was no longer a futuristic ideal, but a haunted archive of femininity, one that exposed the brittle structures of representation itself. His models rigid and glazed, like wretched marionettes, limbs clickety-clacking in jerky grace, porcelain masks fixed in haunted smiles, do not inhabit womanhood. They perform its breakdown. They do not strut to seduce. No, they stagger to disturb. In this context, the collection Cyborgs of Historical Decay not only articulated its distinctive post-human vision, but also marked Galliano's decisive departure from the chrome futurism of Mugler and the biopunk ambiguity of McQueen or Van Harpen. Where those designers imagined technologically augmented bodies propelled through speculative futures, Galliano's automatons stagger backward through time, assembled from the ruins of femininity's visual archive. Smelik argues that post-human fashion reveals, quote, a new processes of becoming, end quote, through entanglement between human and non-human actors. Galliano's figures exemplify this principle, staging not emergent becomings, but unstable unbecomings, cyborg bodies fracturing under the weight of historical femininity. It is this retrograde, haunted automaton, garbled rather than ascending, that defines his singular contribution to fashion's evolving post-human vocabulary. In an era dominated by AI-generated bodies, CGI models, and hyperreal digital fashion, Galliano's analog, handcrafted cyborgs stand as a counterpoint, revealing that the most unsettling simulations are not the frictionless digital ones, but those that expose the seams, labor, and fragility of embodiment itself. Through the theoretical lenses of Haraway, Butler, and Baudrillard, this article has explored how robotic femininity in fashion, film, and cultural mythology reveals the labor, the illusion, and the simulation of gender. Metropolis, Blade Runner, and the Stepford Wives each render the female machine as a cautionary symbol, beautiful, programmable, yet ultimately disposable. Galliano's Margiela automatons reject this lineage. They do not obey, nor do they aspire to authenticity. Instead, they scratch, dig, and drag themselves out of the refuse heap and return to confront. These are cyborgs not of sleek futurity, but of historical decay, draped in the detritus of gender's visual culture history and dragging it down the runway like the tapes of a wretched, corrupted file system. Haraway's cyborg is a political fiction, an ironic myth, and a strategy of survival in a world saturated by signs, and Galliano's dolls are its couture equivalent, illegible, impure, fractured, and fiercely resistant to containment. They make visible the scaffolding of femininity, and then they let it crumble into foam-wrapped, rain-slicked, and porcelain-skinned, short-circuited robotic ruination. Their autonomous beauty is uncanny, their presence dissonant, their performance a refusal of seamless performative spectacle. In an age where identity is ever more enciphered, performed, and digitized, the Margiela cyborgs offer something rare, not a future to believe in, but a simulation breaking down in real time. No ideal here, instead an interruption, and through their déshabillé and unsteady marching through couture's uncanny valley, they do not ask to be understood, loved, or even repaired. This was a talk from my research Simulacra in Silk, Haraway's Cyborg, Performative Femininity, and the Aesthetics of the Automaton on the Margiela Runway. This was published in Fashion Theory on January 19th, 2026. I am Dr. Mark Joseph O'Connell.